But I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet.
We do not have a strategy yet. Those words have been so controversial over the last 24 hours. President Obama acknowledging that he and his advisors do not have a plan yet, a military plan yet, to battle ISIS militants inside Syria. Now, those comments come as today, just a little over an hour ago, the United Kingdom raised its terror threat level to severe. That is the second highest level in Britain, indicating they believe a terror attack is highly likely. And right now, we're awaiting a White House press briefing. The press secretary will face questions really any minute now. This comes as the U.S. faces down war on two fronts. ISIS now claiming it has slaughtered hundreds of Syrian soldiers as the number of Syrian refugees hits 3 million. And in Ukraine, what NATO is calling a serious escalation of Russian aggression. Ukrainians call it an invasion. The Kremlin denies it sent as many as 1,000 troops over the border. But now Russia's president is calling on rebels to create a humanitarian corridor so Ukrainian troops can retreat. President Obama is weighing more sanctions, but as conflict rages on, is the United States making the right moves? Obviously, questions that will be facing Josh Earnest when he takes that podium you just saw right there in just a few minutes. We could see more of the White House in damage control. Josh Earnest, the White House press secretary, has been answering a whole lot of questions since the president went out yesterday and said he and advisors have no strategy to deal with ISIS in Syria. This is what we know. President Obama this week authorized military surveillance flights over Syria, fueling speculation that U.S. airstrikes were imminent. And then yesterday, before speaking with reporters, the president met with his national security team in the White House Situation Room to discuss the ISIS threat in both Iraq and Syria. I want to bring in our panel right now. Michelle Kaczynski at the White House. Our political analyst Josh Rogan is with us, and military analyst Mark Hertling, a retired Army Lieutenant General, joins us as well. Michelle, I want to start at the White House with you because it has been very busy there. Normally, the president speaks and they let it sit. However, since the president spoke yesterday, White House advisors have been out again and again and again and again to explain his explanation.
Yeah, you might say they were the non-shots heard around the world, and critics were quick to jump on it. I know the Republican Party tweeted out, "What is the Obama strategy?" Not having a strategy. And the White House was equally quick to explain that he was only referring to military action as a possibility in Syria, saying that those options were still being presented, worked up by the Pentagon, and the president will consider those when the time is right. But yeah, it does kind of take on this aspect of damage control. I mean, the White House will say he didn't misspeak. If you listen to the speech, he explains fully that there is a strategy and sort of a well laid out one, in their opinion, on Iraq. It was just referring to Syria. But, you know, those words sort of strike to the heart of Americans. Well, ISIS has been a threat in Syria for a long time. We've seen the very, very quick evolution that the White House concedes. Yes, it's grown a lot even in the last 6 months. So many are asking now, why isn't there a strategy now as opposed to later? The White House response has been, well, it's way more complicated than that. There's even the factor of identifying targets, gathering information. What the White House has really been emphasizing is, in terms of Syria especially, it's going to take more of a regional coalition, an international coalition, to really get results. That going in with bombs isn't necessarily going to change anything. Of course, some would disagree with that, but keep in mind, we do still have American hostages there. Their lives hang in the balance. The White House is also, and even agreeing, some critics, that the White House doesn't want to telegraph its plans immediately. So really, there's this huge and complex back and forth, John.
Before I get to Josh and General Hertling, Michelle, I do want to ask you if there's been any White House response yet to the announcement by the United Kingdom that that country is elevating its threat level to severe.
So far, no. And it's interesting to imagine, you know, how they're crafting this. We asked for a response first to the threat level change and then to Cameron's speech, but that's still being worked out. We haven't heard anything yet, John.
All right, General Hertling, I do want to ask you this. The president said we have no strategy now to deal with ISIS militants inside Syria. Is that telegraphing too much information to a group that you might soon be, at a minimum, bombing?
Well, not to run into a bad scene with the president, but yes, that is telegraphing too soon. I think that the strategy of the United States is to protect U.S. citizens and defend our values. And saying something like that, even though they're probably looking at a variety of options to deal with ISIS in Syria and a variety of options of what to do next in that part of the region, it's probably not a good thing to say something like that to the press.
And Josh, you cover politics, you cover national security. You know, no matter what the White House says, it's not the headline they wanted to be dealing with this morning when they got up. No new strategy.
Right. It's a political problem, but frankly, I think it's obvious that the White House doesn't have a strategy for Syria. This is a war that's been going on for 3 years. As was noted, ISIS has been a threat in Syria for a year, fighting against the moderate rebels. So they already know that we don't have a strategy. It doesn't come as a surprise to them. It really doesn't come as a surprise to us reporters either. The question really is, why not? What are they waiting for? This is the split inside the administration that me and my colleague Eli Lake reported at the Daily Beast this morning, is that there are more and more people, including senior officials in the State Department, the intelligence community, the Defense Department, who are saying, yes, we don't have a strategy. That's the problem. We need to do something now. It has to involve Syria. Maybe it involves strikes, maybe not, but we just got to decide. We can't wait any longer. So that's the real issue. The fact that President Obama acknowledged it in front of the nation was kind of shocking and politically, inelegant, to be sure. Now they're mopping that up. But they can't mop up the fact that they still don't have the strategy. And until they come up with that, this is going to be a continuing problem that just gets worse and worse, not just for the president, not just for the American people, but also for the people of the region who are suffering from this growing and very dangerous and brutal threat.
And Josh, it's very difficult to see where the American people are on this right now, because there's been this sense for years now that the United States is war weary after Iraq and Afghanistan. But this new poll from Pew indicates that 54% of Americans think that the United States is not taking a strong enough role overseas. That could include, you would think, in Syria.
Right. It's clear that Americans are war weary, and it's clear that major intervention in Syria is not favored by the majority of Americans, but that's a straw man. That's never really been an option. There's no serious person who advocates American boots on the ground in Syria. The Obama administration has been very reluctant to intervene in Syria. They've been very risk averse, and there are good arguments to support that. But what we find mostly in foreign policy, that the polls follow the leadership and the messaging coming both from the military and the administration and from Congress. So the more that we can't ignore Syria, the more that Americans get killed or Americans go to fight there, or the threat to Americans becomes more real and more obvious, the more that Americans all over the country are going to realize that this is a problem that can't be ignored. That's not going to encourage people to support boots on the ground in Syria, but it is going to encourage people to ask the question, as everyone is doing today, is what are we doing about it? And there are a range of options. Some of them are more risky than others. And Americans want to know what's the plan. And when President Obama says we don't have one, that's disconcerting to a lot of people. And that's something that they're going to have to create to fix, not just through fixing the statement, but through fixing the policy.
All right, guys, stick around, because we could hear more on this subject. We could hear more about plans, more details. We're awaiting a briefing from the White House set to begin any minute. This, of course, on the heels of that revelation that we keep talking about, that the administration has no strategy yet to deal with ISIS in Syria. We'll hear about that and also the new terror threat in the United Kingdom right after this. Right, we're watching the White House right now, and specifically the White House briefing room, because any minute we could be seeing a press briefing by White House Secretary Josh Earnest. A lot of questions for him and the administration regarding the United Kingdom raising its terror threat level, not to mention the strategy in Iraq and Syria against ISIS. Just last hour, British Prime Minister David Cameron announced that Britain has raised its terror threat level to severe, indicating they think an attack is highly likely. He pointed directly to attacks by ISIS militants in Syria and Iraq as the impetus. Also, the fact that some 500 people from Britain have gone to Syria to fight in the battles there. This all comes a day after President Obama acknowledged that his national security advisors are still working out a plan for military options to deal with the ISIS threat in Syria. I want to bring in Barbara Starr, our Pentagon reporter, also retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. Barbara, I want to start with you here. What are the types of options at this point available to the president?
Well, in terms of military options, I think the only realistic one that the Pentagon is looking at is, in fact, airstrikes, limited airstrikes inside Syria. You know, you could increase arming the rebels in Syria. Not very likely. That's been problematic all the way along. You could put U.S. special operations on the ground. Extremely unlikely. The president is not likely to even authorize U.S. boots on the ground. So you're looking at limited airstrikes. But I think it's important, one of the distinctions you just made, John, the president yesterday was talking about military options for Syria and Iraq vis-a-vis ISIS. What Prime Minister Cameron is talking about, which the U.S. has already talked about as well, is dealing with that threat to the homeland that ISIS may pose as fighters return from that battlefield to their home countries in Europe and even try to return back to the United States.
It is a very important distinction, and in Britain, that homeland concern is obviously much greater, I think, in some cases than it is here in the United States, but is also of greater concern to the British than their role inside Iraq and Syria. The British not taking part in the airstrikes in Iraq so far. It doesn't appear like they have any plans to join any potential action in Syria. General Hertling, you know, we talk about possible military action airstrikes. The president's been criticized for his choice of words yesterday, but he does have the Secretary of State John Kerry heading to the region. He has been talking to other leaders from the region, developing a coalition, working this diplomatic side of it. That is certainly part of a crucial strategy, is it not?
That gets to the strategy, John. You've hit the nail on the head. It isn't just dropping bombs, and that's what any military professional will tell you. It's a diplomatic approach, it's an informational approach, it's an economic approach, and I think what you have with the Vice President going to the region is exactly that. I think there's probably other activity going on in NATO right now beyond the Ukrainian-Russian situation of how do we come together with our NATO allies to address this issue. There's informational messaging, and there's probably economic things coming around that we aren't even aware of as we develop a strategy. What you just said to Barbara, too, I think is very important, because whereas Prime Minister Cameron has addressed the Homeland Security, I think as part of the national security team, the President not only has the Joint Chief and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, he also has the Homeland Security Chief. That we may not be seeing that, but that's going on.
Barbara, you know, the United States has begun to receive cooperation at the military level and diplomatic level inside Iraq from its allies in the region. How difficult will it be to translate that cooperation from Iraq into Syria if that is the way the White House decides to go?
You know, that's a really that's a tough question, but obviously a good one and a crucial one. Working with, there's going to be a new Iraqi government shortly. The U.S. hope is now that the former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, or soon to be former, is gone, that they can work with this new government. I think the U.S. is now increasingly publicly talking about holding Maliki quite responsible for the rise of ISIS inside Iraq. If Maliki had had a better government, if he'd been a more inclusive leader, the Sunni population that he pushed away would not have become perhaps so disaffected, joined forces with ISIS in Iraq, and thereby given ISIS this broad, open, free access, essentially, to move on into Iraq. They might have been more limited in their operations. They might have stayed to some extent on the Syrian side of the border. But, you know, getting international cooperation, getting some kind of strategy to act inside Syria is going to be very tough. Everybody wants to talk about working against ISIS, but you got to get countries to sign up for it, and that still really hasn't happened.
General Hertling, and I apologize in advance because I might have to cut you off any second.
Sure.
Because this White House briefing could begin really at any moment right now. The United States has the Kurds to work with, the Peshmerga to work with inside Iraq. How important will it be to develop a closer military relationship with these moderate anti-Assad rebel groups, but also anti-ISIS rebel groups inside Syria? Does the United States need those allies on the ground to be effective against ISIS?
Yeah, the Free Syrian Army, those moderates could be critical, but again, that's part of the option development, John, and I think that's part of the overall design of the strategy. What ways do you have and what means do you have to get after what's going on in Syria itself? Could it be the Free Syrian Army? Could it be a blocking of the border as the Iraqi government gets stood up a little bit better and they can actually put border patrols up there? Can you contain ISIS in one area while you're helping the Iraqi government free them from their area? That's all part of the strategy sausage making, if you will, that's probably going on right now with the national security team.
And we are awaiting the White House press briefing. Will begin now in any second. I want to go to the United Kingdom while we wait in London. Our Aaron McLaughlin is there. The British Prime Minister just announced that that nation is raising its threat level to severe, the highest level that has been there in 3 years, indicating they believe a terror threat is likely. Aaron, remind us why they made that move now.
Well, they made the move now based on intelligence reports. This is a decision that was taken independent of government ministers, and it's the 4th highest level possible, the next level being critical, as you mentioned, meaning that a terrorist attack is, quote, highly likely. And they made this based on an assessment, a comprehensive assessment, it would seem, of intelligence reports. Unclear if there was a specific report that prompted this particular decision. But what it does mean for people here in Britain is that they go about their daily lives in a normal way, but remain vigilant if they see anything unusual, to report that to police. Security personnel, both private and public, have been asked to remain on a state of heightened alert as well. John?
All right, as we said, we are awaiting this White House press briefing. I'm just reminding you, because I may have to cut you off, anyone off at any minute. I believe we have it going on right now. That is the White House Press Secretary, Josh Earnest. He's been talking a lot since the president briefed the press yesterday. Let's hear what he has to say.
Before we get started, and just for the sake of efficiency, I know that there's at least one aspect of the president's news conference yesterday that attracted some attention, and so I thought I might just sort of go over at least one aspect of that argument. And it's specifically this: that, the president stands squarely behind the decision that he made yesterday to wear his summer suit at yesterday's news conference. It's the Thursday before Labor Day. He feels pretty good about it. So, anyway, with that bit of frivolity out of the way, Nedra.
So why aren't you wearing it?
I will say that I contemplated it. Seemed like it might be a little too much. So, Nedra, do you want to get started with some more serious questions today?
Yes. Does the United States see a higher terror threat here following the announcement by Britain today?